If I may, it's a pleasure to introduce a longtime and dear friend, a leader at one of these seminal companies that created Silicon Valley, a person who is a passionate professional when it comes to diversity and leadership in the workplace. Don't be fooled by her youthful appearance. She is an amazing executive whom I greatly admire. Will you join me in welcoming the global leader of public affairs for Intel Corporation, Grace Davis.
Thank you, Carl. Hello, and thank you for coming today. As Carl mentioned, I'm Grace Davis, and I'm the head of public affairs worldwide for Intel. I'm proud to be sharing the stage this afternoon with these amazing leaders. At Intel, we're not only accelerating innovation when it comes to technology, but we're also taking a more proactive stance, as Carl mentioned, in other crucial business areas as well. As I'm sure you've heard, last year Intel announced its goal of being the first high-tech company to reach full representation of women and underrepresented minorities in our US workforce by 2020. We committed $300 million to support this goal and accelerate diversity and inclusion across the technology industry. We set a goal of 45% diverse hiring by the end of this year. As of our June report, I'm proud to announce we're closing in on our goal at 43%. Thank you. Intel's commitment to full representation isn't just the right thing to do, it's a business imperative. And I'd like to share that with you for just a moment. We recently commissioned a report with Dalberg Global Development Advisors that found improving ethnic and gender diversity in the US technology workforce could create $570 billion in new value for the tech industry and could add almost 2% to the national GDP. As the tech community and Intel evolves, the talent within our walls must reflect the amazing breadth of opportunity and change in the internet economy. At Intel, like many folks in this room, we know that you are what you measure. We hold ourselves accountable to reach our workforce goals. And while some are surprised that we're being completely transparent of the level of our transparency, it keeps us accountable and promotes an understanding among our peer companies and the tech workforce. Which brings me to our panelists today. The people I am introducing epitomize taking action. They have all faced challenges and turned those opportunities into paving the way forward for all of our success. With us today is our moderator, Barbara Marshman, page editor for the Mercury News since 2008. She's been covering aspects of the community for more than 20 years and still considers it her passion. Also with us is Dr. Aart de Geus, chairman and co-CEO of Synopsys. Since co-founding Synopsys in 1986, Dr. de Geus has expanded Synopsys from a startup synthesis company to a global high-tech leader. Alongside him is Lisa Jackson, Apple's Vice President of Environment, Policy, and Social Initiatives. Lisa oversees Apple's efforts to minimize its impact on the environment. She is also responsible for Apple's education policy programs, its product accessibility work, and its worldwide government affairs functions. Prior to her current role, she served 4 years as the administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And finally, we are honored, deeply honored, to have General Lori Robinson, Commander of North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, and the United States Northern Command, U.S. NORTHCOM. And I'll take a moment to let you know that my kids are very impressed with NORAD because at the end of the year, Santa, right? You guys can track Santa, right? So I have to tell you, they were deeply impressed when I told them where I was going to be today.
Well, you took away my final bullet. I was going to talk about NORAD tracks Santa.
In all seriousness, she has served in a variety of positions as an air battle manager and commanded an operations group, a training wing, an air control wing, and deployed as vice commander of the 405th Air Expeditionary Wing, leading more than 2,000 airmen flying B-1 Lancer, KC-135 Stratotanker, and E-3 Sentry aircraft in operations enduring and Iraqi freedom. Please join me in welcoming all of our panelists today.
Well, thank you. It's delightful to be here, and particularly delightful to have the General here. It's a real treat. I'd like to start out with you on a leadership question. You know, most women in careers face a glass ceiling at some time. Some of them are easier to break than others, but you must have been up against tank armor. I mean, how did you do what you've done? How did you navigate that system? And when did you know you were going to rise to the level you are now?
Well, first of all, I never knew I was going to be here. In fact, if you ask my husband and a couple of other people in the audience, they're as surprised as I am, quite frankly. But what I would tell you is that it's about humble, credible, approachable. It's about being the best that you can be no matter what anybody asks you to do. It's about attitude, aptitude, and opportunity. And if I sit back and I look at all those things, I had people that believed in me, put me in places that wasn't normal, asked me to do things that neither my career field nor a woman had done before, and I strived very hard to never let them down, and so I'm here.
I have to ask this. There are some national leaders or aspiring national leaders who are still saying that women do not belong in the military along with men. What do you say to that?
No, they're wrong.
Yes.
It is incredibly simple in my book. You know, the one thing I will say is we have a standard. As long as anybody meets that standard, they belong in our United States military and have the opportunity to serve our nation.
Thank you. Lisa, you've taken leadership roles in both government, the EPA, and now at Apple. How different are those systems to navigate? Do you operate differently in a private company than you did in a government agency?
I think at first blush, everyone assumes they're more different than they are. Now, I did 25 years in public service and about 3.5 years in the private sector. So I can definitely speak about sort of working your way up through. But I do think that, especially in some of the work that's done out here, the systems thinking that you learn in the public sector is really helpful to sort of integrate different trains of thought and different ways of thinking. I don't think, that Apple is, or that a lot of companies out here are traditionally sort of the manufacturing or industrial sector that people may think of when they think of the private sector. So I feel very much at home. There's certainly a difference. And, I went from running an agency to now having a group that I work with. And frankly, I like both of them equally the same, but that's a very different experience as well.
Yeah. Oh, well, I think the obvious question for Aart here is, how does it feel being the token male on this panel?
Finally a minority, finally. No, I think it is fabulous that we have two just unbelievably outstanding female role models right here. Because you only have to look around in Silicon Valley to see that women are underrepresented in high tech, and you can immediately point at all kinds of historical reasons and technology deep and so on. But there's also no question that if we can use the entire breadth of the population, high tech should be one of the best areas because fundamentally it is as close to a meritocracy as anything. At the end of the day, if you don't have the algorithms right, the technology right, the ability to run your business right, the market will be unforgiving instantaneously. And so for people with great talent, a desire to shine and perseverance, their routes, no matter how long the career is.
Or do you, in what you've seen over the years, do you think there's a difference in the way women need to climb the ladder, or men? Do you think there are different strategies, or?
Well, we were literally talking about it, walking up the stairs and asking the question, well, to what extent in a high-tech world, which is different than many other fields because there's a phase of super high creativity in people's ability when they form their career that happens to coincide with the same time that women have children. And you could say, well, having a child is the most creative act, period, and you have to be really good at it. But at the same time, Laurie was saying, yeah, but you know, there's no reason that the man cannot take care more of the children. The fact is, there is a focus that once children are around that is so central because the child is the most important thing in the life of a family, and that never goes away. Having said that, we also said, hey, there's no question that precisely because of that, what we're finding is that many women managers have an uncanny ability to be multitasking. And you say, well, that's by necessity, but you know, necessity is the mother of invention, and today careers are quite long. And therefore there are opportunities, and I see increasingly in the high-tech world women that move up step by step by step by step, and because of that are unbelievably solid in their ability to manage very complex situations.
Well, that's great. Let's talk about one tech issue that you all have in common in what you do, and that is dealing with cybersecurity. Now, I know it's sometimes hard to discuss this in large groups because you can't really talk about what you're working on, but General, what is NORAD's role in dealing with this?
Yes, ma'am. So what I would tell you is my role as the commander is to ensure that we have our networks defended appropriately, and to ensure that if there's any intrusions that we all know about it, and that we try and get after it very quickly. But it's very defensive in nature, and it's on the defense networks only.
Okay.
Yes,
and so you are not engaged in the overall
No, ma'am.
Defense Department?
No, ma'am.
And do you partner at all with tech companies in what you're doing, or are you pretty...
In some level, yes, but just in an understanding way. It's more, how do we ensure that our networks remain able to be used, and most importantly, how do we ensure that we can have defense in depth?
Yeah. Lisa, is that part of what you do at Apple, or are you...
Well, it's certainly part of what, in my government affairs role, part of the values and policies that we advocate. I think pretty obvious to everybody in this room, you know, Apple is about that interface and trust between customers and the products that we make. And so certainly for the iPhone, you know, when you think about, most people now, studies have shown, think about the iPhone or think about it as sort of an extension of who they are, right? Your photos are on there, your most personal information, your contacts, information about your family. Mine's has, you know, I can track my kids, don't tell them, through Find My iPhone. I, you know, increasingly have health information on there because of the Apple Watch and other apps that I use. So what we know is that that relationship with the consumer and privacy is very much also about security. So there's the security, I guess the defensive security that the general mentioned, where we have to be very vigilant about hacking into customers' accounts, into our own systems. That's a constant job for us, and one we take very seriously. But also we feel as though one of the things we can do for our customers is offer them the opportunity to have the best security for their information as well.
Art, do you see enough collaboration between government and tech companies on trying to work this out?
No, not yet. And I think we need to take a step back to realize that what is happening is something fabulous that will create immensely more problems. You know, we're really entering the third phase of digital capabilities, the PC being the first one, changed the world, the mobile connectivity, phone, changed the world again. And now there's this thing coming, IoT, Internet of Things, meaning everything is going to be connected that has any value, and it can be your car, your house, your factory, your body, you name it. Now, Internet of Things has an immense potential because it sounds too simple. It's not just a connection. Simultaneously, what's being added to that is what used to be called artificial intelligence, better called digital intelligence. In other words, everything is going to become smart. So this is very attractive, but it connects everything. And IoT is sort of the equivalent of putting kitchen windows in banks. They're not supposed to be kitchen windows in banks. And closing them after the fact is almost impossible. And this is where I do think there's a important role of government and some standard-setting bodies to say, what are the minimum requirements to make this safe by construction? Not safe by remediation, because you can never get there. And we're going to enter a very interesting phase where the value of these new things is so exciting that people will rush towards adopting them. And privacy, by the way, is completely over in that process, right? Because when things are open, everybody can find things out. And so the downsides are going to manifest themselves quite starkly. And I think that will touch every domain, from the best protected ones to the ones that you can buy at Fry, so to speak. And I think more collaboration will be needed for that.
And I just want to add, I don't disagree with anything you said, Art, except I would just, maybe a different glosses. I think we have to challenge the notion, especially here in the Valley, that that kind of convenience and sort of world-changing technology must come at the expense of sort of, let's rush over to it and wish later that we could get back the privacy and security. I like to talk about it as security, because I think it's not, you know, it's not a moment where you feel like I lost my privacy. It's where you have that feeling like I am no longer safe online, or there is a way into my home or into my data or into my bank account or into anything that I did not intend to put there. And so I do believe transparency is really important. I think this Valley and all of us have a lot of thinking and honest dialogue to do, and I think many of us are doing about what privacy means and how far you can go with and without giving all of your information. I mean, Apple's talking about differential privacy and really trying to expand how much you can learn on device rather than in a cloud that can be hacked. I think those are exactly what we should be talking about. And unfortunately, and you asked about the difference between public and private sector, in some ways, we're functioning a little better than the public sector. And so it's really important that we speak up and offer what we can, however we can, to our country.
General, could you just reassure us that Russian hackers aren't getting into NORAD?
Not my job.
Thank you. General, in your career, amazing career, and personal life, is there one experience you can point to that defines who you are or what you've been able to do?
So yes, you know, as a young 03, so back in 1986, 87, probably a lot of you weren't born then, but I was stationed out at Nellis Air Force Base at the Air Force's equivalent of Top Gun. And the opportunity there to watch people work so hard and be so passionate about what they're doing and be so selfless about what they were doing, and to take care of each other the way that I watched them take care of each other made me understand that I actually was a part of something bigger than me. Made me understand that it wasn't about me, it was about the institution, and it drove me, in my career field at the time, was all about you know, snipping each other off at the knees, and it really drove me about trying to make it better in my career field. And so that experience that I had for about 3 years at Nellis Air Force Base really molded who I am, what I think about, and really drove me to understand that notion that I really was a part of something bigger than me.
And were you kind of aware of that at the time, or is that something in retrospect?
You know, that's a great question, because no, I wasn't. What I was aware of was that as I watched fighter pilots brief a mission, execute a mission, and debrief a mission, and in behind a door be very brutal, blunt, honest, and talk about what did we learn, what can we do better, how do we make it better the next day. But when they opened the door, and rank didn't matter, right? It didn't matter if you had 1 star on or you didn't. Rank didn't matter. But when they opened the door, they took care of each other. It was one of those things where I went, wow, that's interesting. But it took time for me to kind of put that all together.
Lisa, how about you? Is there anything that jumps out, or any particular accomplishment that you feel proud of that catapulted you to where you are today?
I was gonna, so let me pick up on that idea of public service. 2 things, and I say this all the time when I talk to young women. You know, my pediatrician growing up was a woman in New Orleans. And I know it sounds crazy, but it never occurred to me that women shouldn't be doctors and women shouldn't be scientists. Because from my earliest memory, in fact, I was petrified of her because she gave me shots. My mother said I would cry until I got a fever. But, you know, those were the role models. And I came from a family growing up as a young black woman in the South who expected, there was just no excuses that I could make. I was supposed to do well in school. I was supposed to go to college. My dad was a mailman. So I think the other big sort of influence in my life was watching his public service. And I think we owe an incredible debt of gratitude to people who serve our country, starting, of course, with our military, literally putting lives on the line for our freedom. But it pains me a bit because public servants, and I think we have quite a few here, don't get similar thanks very often for serving our community. I mean, I remember my dad would deliver the mail back then. You know, that was the only mail, and that's where your checks came and your money went and how you got paid. And so he was a really valuable part of community. So I think those 2 experiences are why I'm a scientist today, a chemical engineer, not a doctor, as I thought I'd be, and why I spent so much of my time in public service. And even at Apple, I still think most of my passions are all around environment and our social initiatives, which are about serving in a different way.
Art, you and I have talked before about the tech community and public service, involvement in tech leaders in the Valley and giving back to the community, and I know that's a core value for you. How do you impart that to your company as you lead the company?
Well, you know, for a number of years I've been misquoting Gertrude Stein as a leader is a leader is a leader, meaning that if you aspire to be a leader in your company, you should also be a leader in your family and in your community. And I think we are quite conscious that we are unbelievably privileged by the time we live in, the location, the health of the business economy, you name it, compared to most of the rest of the world. And I think with privilege comes a degree of responsibility, and everybody interprets it differently, but it is most definitely beyond oneself. And so from the early days at Synopsys, I asked every location to have at least one community effort. And it sort of has taken on, and it's become a little bit part of the soul of the company. And today, in a given year, virtually every other working day, we have a community event somewhere in the world. So it's quite a number of things. And most of the focus has been around the center of gravity of education, because there's another belief, which is that education is really the skill that keeps giving and that changes the world. And specifically here in Silicon Valley, we embraced the science fairs at a moment in the late 90s where it was so clear that the United States education investment, success of the school system was severely taxed. Today we have passed about 1.7 million kids through this, about 150,000 per year. And it's not that every science project immediately puts a genius on the street, But there's no question that a lot of kids lose their anxiety for science and math and so on, and maybe just tilt it a little bit towards, it could be possible for me. And if that's the only thing we achieve, belief in people, in themselves, that they can do it, is probably the biggest gift you can give.
Thank you. Yes. We wish there were more of you. So nobody gets to a pinnacle of career leadership without making some mistakes or missing some opportunities. And of course, we all love to hear about other people's mistakes. So let me ask, start with Lisa. What's something in your life that you wish you had a do-over on, or some opportunity you might have missed?
So many. I'm not sitting here like I can't think of one. I'm trying to think what sounds really, really okay to say. I mean, I think...
Well, that'll be no fun, Lisa.
No fun at all.
It's a long list.
Yeah.
I was thinking about my first marriage, but I should probably let that. You know, I think... to this day, I have a master's in engineering, but I didn't get the PhD. To this day, I still wish I had. Not to collect the degree, but because there's some measure in luck in every career, and it's very hard, even though I am getting older, for me to look back like, oh, let me tell you how it's done, because I have no idea. It's sort of, like the secret sauce a little bit. And luck is in there. But when I think back on opportunities that are foreclosed a bit, if I had stayed and done the PhD, it was really hard because I love people, and I love policy, and I love interaction, and I love application. And I think the discipline of doing the other side of it might have opened up a different career path where I would have stayed more on the technical side first. Now, you would say, well, you're perfectly successful now. I just always encourage young people. I say it to my sons, they're not listening, but especially women, because again, of that child rearing thing, get the education you can early as you can afford to do it, because going back usually involves a level of sacrifice, either personally, professionally, or both, that is so much harder to pick up later.
Good one. General? Oh.
She said I gave you as much time as I could.
Filibuster.
So here's what I'm going to say. I'm like Lisa. I could sit up here and I could name off 3, 5, 10 things, and I will be with you on the first husband thing too. Yeah. But you got to find the right guy, and it's the second one all the time. But here's what I would say. I don't ever, right, girl? Huh? All right. So far, yeah. My husband's right here. He's like, what do you mean so far? Sweetie. Anyway, so what I would say is I could point to you at a bunch of different places where maybe I wished I'd made a different decision. But what I would say to you, and I could reflect on that, and and it would do, just like Lisa said, maybe have taken me down a different path. But what I try and do each and every day, at the end of the day, is reflect for a moment and say, what happened today? What are the things that I could have done better today? And how do I become a better commander and airman tomorrow? And how do I take care of my people better tomorrow? And so that I can learn right that moment, how am I better than I was yesterday, that I can be tomorrow? Because if we sit back all the time, and you're exactly right, ma'am, that we all have times in our lives where we wish we had chosen a different path or something else was different. But I would just say to you, for me, it's about that moment of reflection at night for about 10 or 15 minutes of what happened today, how can I be better tomorrow, and continue to try and improve myself and everything around me.
Okay, two tough ones to top, Art.
Well, I'm glad that you didn't mention the accidental hitting of some missiles, so that's good. And it's going to be a little hard to explain to my wife the advice I got from the previous... I'm still married, so... She's not here, so please don't... Anyway, looking back at certainly the journey with Synopsys, there have been highs and lows, and certainly in the early days, there were a number of times where it became completely unclear, so what do we do now? And as a young CEO, it's like, you're really struggling with it. I mean, you're awake at night and you don't quite know what to do. And at that time, I was still very, very much on this, be open, transparent, seek advice from whoever wants to talk to you, share with your team your doubts. What do you say, oh? Well, what you quickly learn is that with the exception of maybe 3 people, everybody else sort of starts to look like he has no clue what he's doing, isn't it? And the fact is that in these leadership positions, as much as it's fabulous to be able to speak to people candidly, to get more ideas and more insights, the fact is most people expect from a leader to say, here's where we're going, and to actually not have doubts, because they have plenty to do themselves, they have plenty of doubts themselves, and they want to actually have somebody call the tune. And to this day, I find that a very difficult dilemma, because there's a tension pair between being open about what is really difficult, maybe unfeasible, things that go badly, and so on, and the notion that people move because they believe you can win or be successful. And I think one of the hallmarks of the leader is not necessarily to have the right answer to that, but to never give up searching for the right balance.
Thank you all. And I'll just second the second marriage thing.
3, 2, 1.
General, what's the hardest decision in your career that you've had to make?
Probably the hardest decision was when the Air Force was going to send my husband to Korea and me to Okinawa, Japan. And we had a big conversation, and my husband, who I'm incredibly proud of, is a retired 2-star general, Thunderbird pilot. Very cool. And I said to him, you're going to be a general officer and I'm not. I said, why don't I get out of the Air Force and you stay in? And he said, well, what would you do if you got out? Well, I kind of said, I don't know. And we made the decision that he would get out and join the reserves and fly for the airlines, and I stayed in. And that moment was, it was a very difficult decision for the two of us, because we were doing what was best for the family. And so that was a very difficult personal decision. But what was so cool about it is that we never looked back. And it wasn't easy when he first got out, but we never looked back. And we're so proud to be where we are today. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Great second husband. Lisa, how about you?
A keeper. Yeah. Wow. Yep. She said yep. Okay, so I'm going to try to say it quickly, but it's two things that are related, so bear with me, Barbara, I'm sorry. So I grew up in New Orleans. I was actually in New Orleans right before Hurricane Katrina hit. It was near my mom's birthday, so I had gone down to see her with my brother, so I ended up driving her out. You know sort of the next part of the tale. The levees broke. Her house is gone, destroyed. Luckily, she's still with us. And I remember right after I said, I was doing really well in my career. I was at that point running the equivalent of the EPA in the state of New Jersey where I lived, and I wanted to go home to be part of bringing back my hometown. And I got so close, and my mother said, it's not your time. She said, "You're not supposed to be there. I'm not supposed to be there." She's never gone back. She was, really, her age made it hard. So fast forward, careers progress, and a decade later or so, we have the BP oil spill, and I'm head of the EPA at the time when the Gulf Coast is experiencing, just getting over Katrina, and here comes this oil spill. And I've said that the hardest professional decision I had to make was this issue of dispersants, putting more chemicals in the water or not after, the hundreds of millions of gallons of oil that were gushing in. But it was really, I never forget my mother saying to me, "Told you, there was another plan for you." She said, "God had another plan for you. You had to be where you were to help New Orleans and the Gulf Coast, as only a daughter of the coast could do." So, always go to your mom is probably the lesson in that story, but, also that usually you get another shot.
And Aart.
Well, I've been thinking and came up more with a generic answer because having talked to many CEOs, including in groups, we asked that question, what are the toughest decisions? And it's unbelievable, 80+% will give exactly the same answer, which is, how do you deal with transitioning somebody out of the organization or into a role that they really didn't want to go for? And invariably, all the CEOs come to the same conclusion: I waited way too long, I procrastinated. Now that doesn't explain, so why is it so hard? And I was wondering, what is it? Well, I think it is that if you aspire to be an honest, true leader, you quickly learn that people are not the one dimension of the job. There are many dimensions, including families, including health questions, including how their friends feel, how their ego is, and so on. And so you actually don't want to be a judge on somebody's life and say, okay, now it's changing and tough cookies, it's going to not be so good. And yet, you have to make judgment calls. And the judgment calls are a balance between the needs of the individuals and the sum of the individuals as a company or as any other organization and the needs of the organization. And that turns out to be actually very, very difficult. And again, I think it falls into this field of tension pairs. Tension pairs, when the call is 80-20, it's easy to make a decision. All the difficult ones are 51-49, or it could be 49-51. And that is ultimately what management and leadership is about, is despite the fear of doing it wrong, despite the sharing and feeling the weight of what this may do to somebody's future, to still go through the process, do it with dignity, and always with the desire to do the right thing for the person, no matter what the right thing is for the company. And I know most CEOs, no matter how experienced, struggle with it.
Thank you. I'd like to ask you all, what's the biggest worry keeping you awake these days or these nights? Let me take the presidential election off the table. Aside from that, can we start with the general?
Part of my role and responsibility as the commander of NORAD and U.S. Northern Command is to defend the homeland. And if I sit back and I watch Kim Jong-un, and I watch how he's been very persistent in wanting to be able to reach out and touch the United States, and I watch the fact that he's not afraid to fail in public, and I watch the amount of times that he has attempted, that's what keeps me up at night, worrying about, what his abilities are and worrying about what he continues to try to do. And it is my role as the commander to watch what he does and to make sure that we're adequately prepared. I will say this, while I think also one of the most vulnerable times for our country is during a transition of administration. And so I do, from a defense of the homeland perspective, worry about that.
Thank you. Lisa, now we can all stay up at night and worry about all of these. Lisa,
I was
how
going
about
to say
you?
my kids, you know, so I got nothing. I mean, from a professional standpoint, I want my boss to believe I wake up every night thinking about all the things that we have to deal with as a company. And there's lots we need to do. You know, we're working on clean energy, but my passion is the environment, so I think all the time about what we're leaving to our kids and grandkids, this mess they're going to have to clean up when it comes to climate and adapting to sea level rise. But I think in general, it is, I do, and I shouldn't have made a joke about it because there are so many public servants, including my fellow panelists here, but I do think that our non-military government in Washington needs to work. And I hope it works. And I hope it works in a bipartisan manner where we move forward and find solutions where no one may be 100% happy, but we move forward because I think we can only be in this time where we sort of take a time out from being the sort of movers and shakers and leaders of the free world that we need to be. And so I do think that we all have to rebuild community. We have to, I guess, in some ways, not rebuild patriotism, but remember what patriotism really is. It's not blind loyalty. It's putting in the sweat equity to make it better if you don't think it's what it should be. And I hope that actually happens for all of us and for the kids that I wake up thinking about every night. Yeah.
Well, my biggest worry is that the world has dramatically changed in the last 20 years, where suddenly everything is systemically complex, meaning that things are no longer independent, but extremely interdependent. And that makes two things difficult. One is to understand the interdependencies, and two, to take action on them. And you can take some of the things that have relatively long time constants, but are unbelievably visible right now, such as the impact of global warming and how it changes things, and the impact that will have on the economies in the next 50 years, with potentially large migrations of populations, high stress points. You can make the we talked about cybersecurity. That is just a notion of everything is connected. Therefore, when something becomes vulnerable, everything becomes vulnerable. And you can take many other examples that are on the negative side. The challenge here is that an increasingly large number of people feel very much victims to this instead of actors. And some of those people tend to go more towards what's in it for me versus what's in it for us. And yet, at the very moment where the world needs an unbelievable push on the understanding of the us, and you can see the disastrous dialogue that we see right now in the political landscape at every level. It's not just the national level here, it is the global level that is impacted by that. And unfortunately, the best answer to that ultimately is education, and education itself has a very long time constant to have impact. And so it's sort of a latent worry where you can see it happening and you can take action, and yet it requires a high degree of acting together. And that is, frankly, to me, the biggest worry that I can't sleep over.
Well, thank you. We'd like to do a little lightning round here of a few questions, and then I have a few questions from the audience as well that we hope we'll have time to get to. So first, the lightning round, a couple of words or a sentence at most. And why don't we start with Aart? If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
It would be to have the ability that in every meeting, the people leave the meeting 1 inch taller.
General?
I wish I could remember people's names better.
Time travel. Time travel. I want to.
Well, funny you should say that, because the second question is, if you had a time machine to go back in time, when and where would you go? General?
So I want to go forward in time so I can be Gigi with my grandchildren. That's what I look forward to.
Okay. Lisa?
It's a tie. I'd like to go back to when Christ was alive, but I'd also like to be in the hate in 1960.
Wow.
I feel like I was born too late.
Maybe we can share a time cap, because I would like to take my guitar, go back to 1969 Woodstock, be on the stage, and have Jimi Hendrix say, "Man, you're groovy."
So if any of you don't know Legally Blue, Google it. They're great. Art's band. So, and we'll start with Lisa on this one. What's something about you, a talent or a characteristic, that probably nobody in this room knows?
I sang in a band in high school. I was good. So we can talk.
And so while I'm sitting here in a uniform of a United States Air Force airman, there's nothing more that I like than sailing and being on the water.
I'm a proficient agricultural manure spreader driver.
Wouldn't have guessed it.
Not a management analogy, I hope.
And why don't we just start with you again, Art? What's your favorite book that you've read this year?
None right now. And at night, I watch a YouTube, one clip of some great musician, and I hope that I fall asleep thinking it could be me.
That's lovely. General?
Together is Better by Simon Sinek.
Ta-Nehisi Coates is between the world and me, I think.
Great. And finally, and why don't we start with Lisa on this one? This might take more than a few words, but how about if we each say pick one thing that we've learned from one another here? Can you think of something you've learned from one of the other panelists?
Oh, yeah, everything. I just think that this idea of reflecting on the day and the humility that requires from someone in your position is humbling and really important for a leader. And I think you reflected it too, Art, when you talked about this balance between showing vulnerability and not. I think those are incredibly important lessons.
So for me, I would tell you, first, it's been an incredible privilege to be in a space and a place that's totally out of my comfort zone. But to sit here and listen to two people that are, outright leaders in their field and not having walked on this stage, not knowing either of them, having read their bio, but to listen to their words and how much what they think about is very similar to what I think about, but just in a different venue. And it's amazing to me. So it's been a privilege to share the stage.
Well, yeah, to me it confirms what I've always believed, and it became immediately visible within like seconds of speaking to any of them, is that passion is the center of gravity for making anything happen. And you can see it in your eyes when you start talking about something you care about. Yeah. Suddenly they go a little higher, and then there's this spark there. And that spark is magic. It's visible in both Lisa and Laurie to a tremendous degree, and it's the spark that I'm sure made other people follow you, and that's the mark of a leader.
So, do we have time for one question? Okay. Let's take this one. Can you please speak about what helped you most in your development from an individual contributor to becoming a leader? And want to start that, Art?
It probably started as a kid, meaning that 7, 8, 9 years old, being in the street, hanging around with some other kids. So what do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? And then just say, you know what? We're going to build a spaceship in a tree in blue. And all the kids go. And at some point in time, initiative and just going for something as crazy as it may be actually changes things. And once you sort of slither into that role a little bit, it becomes automatic, and then you become a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout, and you lead a little bit there, and you overcome all kinds of things. And then you discover this fabulous thing that the team is dramatically better than the individual. And once that is there in the DNA, I think it tends to resonate and grow on its own.
I would say for me it was just watching my father. My dad was in the Air Force, and just watching him as we moved every 2 or 3 years throughout my life, and just watching how he went and had encounters and how he dealt with those encounters. And I think just watching him do what Art just said, the individual is important, but the team is incredible, and watching him build his team every time we moved.
So great family, great teams, great education, but honestly, becoming a parent for me really did help me tremendously in terms of taking that next step. You have to move, and you're responsible for these lives to some degree. So that was part of it.
And if you can do that, you can do anything, right?
Uh-huh.
So I just want to say one last thing, because I can tell we're getting ready to leave. Don't forget, December 24th, NORAD Track Santa. We promise not to lose him, and we'll watch him go all around the world. Thanks.
Thank you. Wonderful panel. Thank you all.